the directives concept. In that we learned about structural directives, and in structural directive we learned about how to use the structural directive ngIf. So ngIf is a structural directive, and it is used to add or remove any element dynamically. One small example we saw. Later, in different situations and different examples, we are going to use them and work with them. When we learn about validations, events, we will see in different occasions how we can do that. Now, a simple point, what we learned is ngIf requires a Boolean value. So true or false. So based on that, it can add an element or remove the element. Here, some confusions will be there. How we can add any structural directive to HTML element. Already, all structural directives, when you are adding to HTML element, generally we use asterisk ngIf. But sometimes people have a confusion because sometimes at some examples, some projects, you might have seen people writing ngIf in a square brace. So now the doubt is, do I need to write ngIf so in asterisk or ngIf in a square brace actually? So structural directives all are defined in this. Suppose I run this project. Project is Amazon, and here in this design, so here we are using ngIf asterisk ngIf. Now, actually, how we can add this and how we can work with this. So you can see sometimes people using this in a property binding technique. In a property binding technique, generally, so ngIf is not a property of any HTML element. It's not a property of any HTML element. So usually it is not a property of any HTML element. That means when I use a div, in that I am writing ngIf, so then obviously it is a problem because div don't have any property called ngIf actually in general. That means it should show an error that it is not a recognized property. It is not recognized property. So for example, currently, once we start running this, let's see, let's make some changes into this. It is compiled successfully, and let's open this page that we designed in the last session. Okay, and here, so this is working fine. So show preview and hide preview, adding and removing the element. Now in this, now I am making the change here. I am writing this ngIf in a square brace. ngIf, I am writing ngIf. You can see that this ngIf is defined in a square brace, and you can see some problems in our page. So let's go inspect and console, and obviously it should say that. So here it says that no provider for template reference found. No provider for template reference found. It's something different message which is not understandable clearly, because it should say that it is not a recognized property. Then why it is talking about template reference found? No provider for template reference found actually. Generally, when we are using if, and you are writing ng if, when you return like a property, Angular provides a template reference. Angular provides a template reference with a concept called view child, which I will tell you shortly. We will discuss about that. So by using that, it is going to dynamically generate a template and add the template. What is the meaning of template? I will tell you. Actually, we are using div, or we are using span. So we are using paragraph, or we are using some heading. All these can be used as containers to display some message. So many are there. All you can use as containers to display message. But these containers don't have any ngIf property. So for these containers, if you want to use ngIf, you have to use asterisk ngIf. But Angular have dynamic containers. Angular have dynamic containers. So one of the dynamic container is ng template. It is a dynamic container. Several others you will learn situation wise. ng template is a container. What is the advantage of this container is, so through ng template, you can display any content. You can put any content in ng template. But this ng template will not render any HTML element. For example, I have created a div. So inside the div, I am using another div. So actually, inside the div, I don't want any another div. I want to directly render some content. Suppose if I put another div and write an if condition like ng if, then what happens is this div is extra generated inside the parent div. We want only content to generate inside it, not any another HTML element that will disturb our DOM structure. Then what we do is we use this ng template to render information inside it. Now in DOM structure, inside the div, it will be empty. Only it will render this content without any element. This is dynamic element. If you are using such dynamic elements and handling the dynamic elements, then inside those dynamic elements, you can use in a square brace ng if like this. For HTML elements, you cannot use them. So many times people ask this as a confusion because they are confused, because online, you people online browse so many examples and see so many contents. Then you will come with different type of questions because you don't know the standards, but you just browse some examples on internet and go through those examples. So designed by so many different people. And because when a person knows the standards of that particular element, the purpose of that, then he can get only the examples which are following the standards, not everything whatever available on internet. So due to that, some confusion will be there, which one to use, which one not to use. So don't get confused, very simple. If you are dealing with HTML elements, the directives are defined, so with asterisk. And if you are dealing with the dynamic elements, so we use as a property, because dynamic elements, these are Angular elements. Angular elements can recognize these directives as properties. So situation wise, we will see both of them. How we can deal with these and how we can work with these elements, we can see. We will work with them. So whether to use asterisk ngif or as a property ngif is important. The templates also we will see now how to handle that, right? So we learned the basic point that the properties are binded by using ngif is used to add or remove any element dynamically into the DOM hierarchy, Now it is working fine. So what is the meaning of template reference? It says that I am unable to find any dynamic template. That is the reason it says that template reference, which you will see with more example also. Yeah, next, in every example from here, we will see ngif using. Don't think that this is only the example of ngif. From here, everywhere you will be using it in different situations. Now, ngif, so without any alternative, you have seen a simple ngif. Now, ngif can have an alternative, that means decision. So with alternative, decision can be with alternative. That means generally it specifies, alternative means it specifies actions to perform when condition evaluates to true, and another set of actions to perform when condition evaluates to false. That means ngif provides the options like then. It provides the options like then and else. Actually, this kind of syntactical concept may be new for you, but people who are very much aware of functional, structural, imperative programming languages, they are very much used to this kind of structure, because you people are maybe from the background of C, C++ or Java like languages, some majority of times, but very few like the languages which support imperative, functional, structural programming all together. In those languages, actually, if is written like this: if you will have a condition, so condition, and you will have then is a keyword which is regularly used. So then statement if true. So and else. So this then indicates what to happen if the statement is true. Else, so specifies the else block, that means statement if false, if false. So this generally if will end as end if actually. So this kind of programming is very common in structural and functional and imperative based environments. Different programming paradigms are there. So you generally know any one programming paradigm, so you may not have worked with all types of, but generally wherever we use this if, so then else and if, these kind of situations will come regularly. Angular uses some of this structurally. That means then specifies the content to be rendered when condition is true, else will be condition when false. That's how we generally write. Usually syntactically how we write alternative is, so we just use a div. So a div or any container here. So I am using ng if, and here we define condition or any Boolean value, and semicolon, we will put then keyword, and then block ID. So, and we define else, and we use else block ID. That means actually, so under this, so we will have two blocks. One block is, this is the ID, this is then block ID. That means we will, IDs are defined with a hash. This is then block ID. Whatever the then block ID is there inside this, so we put the content on true, and we will create another block, that is else block. This is else block ID, and this contains the content on false. So content on false, that's how we need to define. So IDs are defined with an hash. And this ID is used here. That means if condition is true, then it will add this block, then block. If condition is false, then it will add else block. That means which block to add and which block to remove, that is decided dynamically. So two blocks are there, you can add or remove. So we have to use the dynamic containers without disturbing the DOM structure to manage the content and define the content. For example, let's see, first see. So here I am removing all this design. So this is a rough one. Yeah, I will clean up here. Nothing is there related to the logic also. Okay. And here just I am adding a simple div. And in this div, so we are defining. So ng if, okay. Below this, we are defining two containers. Those containers contains the content, and remember, those containers should not affect the DOM structure. So you can put the containers, but they affect the DOM structure, because when you are dynamically adding and removing content, if DOM structure is disturbed, alignments, placements will be disturbed. That is the reason we use dynamic template, ng template. So this ng template will not generate any DOM element. It will just render your content. So here we have to define any ID for this. ID is hash. I will say true block. You can give any ID, doesn't matter. So I am just giving true block. Okay. And here I will write statement if true. Okay. Statement if true. I am using another container, ng template, and this template so contains, so else this is false block. So that means here it is containing statement if false. That's how we are just defined. And observe here, so how you configure this and how we can handle this. You can see here alternative option is there. Suppose here we are writing so Boolean, so this is true, and then we have to use, after configuring that true, here we have to put a semicolon in the ng if, then is the keyword, and you have to define the then block. then block is true block, true block. And you have to write else, you have to write false block, false block. That means if it is true, then true block will execute. Otherwise, false block will execute. That means in the output, you see statement if true. It shows the statement if true. Observe carefully here when I inspect the elements. In the elements in the body section, you will see that if demo in the container, you see directly the content is rendered. Directly the content is rendered. That's good. That means there is no DOM element here. There is no DOM element. It will not disturb the structure. For example, I change this to false. I change this to false. So then the else block should execute. And you can see that statement if false, else block is executed. So you can define the blocks and you can configure the blocks and you can use the blocks. So technically, it is used for handling an alternative block. And that is done by using ngIf. So with then and else keywords, Now, generally, another question technique, because you think like it is same like if condition that you are using, but you are forgetting like, so this is in the UI you are using. This is not logically you are writing if condition. In the UI, you are using this. In the user interface, you are doing it. So that means technically, there will be different content to display according to the selections. So, and many times when anybody knows about if, they will ask like, can I use multiple conditions? If else if, is there any else if here? So actually, you cannot define multiple then blocks in ngIf directive. So currently, you have seen a simple if. We will put in example also, no worry. This is a general. That means you can put anything inside this now. So the regular question is, can I have multiple conditions? Can you define multiple conditions? So that is one frequently asked question. Like, can we define multiple then blocks? Can we define multiple then blocks? Then blocks, right? In ngIf, can we define that? Right? Can we define multiple then blocks? That means simply like they are asking for, so they are asking for else if actually, else if. That means multiple conditions. So technically no. You cannot define multiple then blocks. So then block will be only one. There cannot be multiple then blocks. You can handle external then template and use for ngIf. You can use, you can handle external then template and use for ngIf to configure multiple conditions. There cannot be multiple then blocks. That means there cannot be multiple conditions configured directly. But you can configure an external then template and use it for ngIf. For multiple conditions, you can use an external then template. How to use external then template and how we can use for our content. So you can do that. You can use an external then template. So by using a directive called view child, by using view child. So view child, ViewChild actually uses a template reference. It is a template reference type. ViewChild is a template type. What this remember, this is a very common question in interviews for even experienced people also. So about ViewChild, about template reference, why you need a ViewChild, where you need a ViewChild, what type the ViewChild is. These are very common questions at experience level also in Angular interviews. So you need to know perfectly. Technically, so what is this ViewChild? First point is, can I use multiple then blocks? No, you cannot use multiple then blocks. So can I use multiple conditions in if, like else if? No, you can't do that directly. Implicitly it is not supported. Then how to handle multiple conditions? By using an external then template. How you can create an external then template? By using ViewChild. Actually, what is ViewChild? So this is a very common question and popular question in interviews, even for experienced level people. So ViewChild, it is a property decorator actually. Property decorator. ViewChild is a property decorator. It configures a query. It configures a query in Vue. That means in the UI, it will configure a query. It configures a query. Actually, the change detector looks for the first element or the element that is matching the condition. So, and it will render and update the UI according to the condition. Actually, this ViewChild is managed by a change detector. This change detector, so you will learn in component life cycle, I will explain. So life cycle, I will explain. Change detection, because under change detection, this ViewChild is discussed actually, but change detector is too far to learn now. Currently, change detection is nothing but identifying the changes in the query. Currently, just understand that part. Later, we will so detailedly discuss, because for that we have to learn the life cycle hooks of component. Then you will get more clarity on this actually. Because in interviews they ask like when we need ViewChild, right? And ViewChild is a part of which component cycle? They ask this type of questions, which you will able to answer after understanding component cycle also. As of now, we are learning ViewChild with ngIf. So detail more things you will understand when you learn component cycle also. So ViewChild is a property decorator. So it configures a query inside the view. Actually, ViewChild comprises of properties. So properties like we have a selector. So we have properties like static. Actually, selector is a property, so that defines the directive type or the name used for querying. The directive type and the name used for querying. We will see that. Another property is read. Another property is static. Static is generally static is used to tell when to solve this query, before change detection or after change detection. That is used through static. That means before the change detected, do you want to render the template, or after the change detection, do you want the render template? By default, actually static will be false. So which you will understand, don't worry, because change detection is a concept which you will later see. We have to relate to that. So technically, ViewChild currently we are using with regard to ngIf. We will discuss one more time with regard to component cycle. Then you will get more in-depth concept about it at an experience level in interviews. These questions are very relevant, asked regularly. So our intention is how to dynamically render an external template. How to dynamically render an external template. That is the simple point. Let's see how we can dynamically render an external template, right? How we can manage that. Let's see how we can do and define it. First, I will show you syntactically how it is done, right? Then we can implement in examples also. Okay, let's go to this component TS file. And here I am writing, so is visible is equal to true. Is visible is just a property I defined as true. And we have to create an external then block. We have to create an external then block. Because in ngIf, it will create only one then block. It will allow only one then block. If you want multiple conditions, you have to create an external then block. How to create external then block? So we have to use any property then block. I'm giving then block. It should be of type then block. It should be of type template reference. It should be of type template reference. This template reference is a member of Angular core library. So first what you have to do is, in order to use it, here at the top, you have to import. So template reference, so class, the template reference class. Another one, you have to import view child also. You have to import view child. So we need view child and a template reference. Okay. Now the external then block should be of type template reference. It is a generic type. Generic type means it will be any. What are generics already we learned. Why it is a generic type? So because it can expect two values. One, it can be null. That means no template is coming. So another one, some content is coming, which can be complex. It can be a string or a number or a HTML, so much. That means now template reference is a generic type. It is expecting any type of value and it should use that value. Or it is expecting null also. That means nothing is coming. That means you know already how we can define union of types. So it is expecting null. So that means template then block is expecting some template or empty, null. So currently it is expecting null. I am using null. Later it can get some value. That means then block is not mandatory. So then block will execute only on the second condition. If first condition is satisfied, the first block will execute. If it is not satisfied, then it will check the second block and the second block will execute. That's how it has to define. Okay. So that is the option. That means we have two blocks to execute. So which block to execute depending on the situation actually. So for example, what we are doing now, see, we are writing the condition here. So this template reference is rendering an external then template into your page actually. Okay. Now, who is responsible for rendering this then block into the UI? Who is responsible for rendering this then block into the UI? That is done by using view child. So view child is responsible for rendering an external then block into the UI. So view child is responsible for handling it. So technically, we created an external then block that will be of type template reference. This then block should be a null type or any type or any type. So initially it is null type. Whenever any change detected means some interaction happened in the UI, then automatically, depending on the condition, this then block should be rendered in the UI. Externally, this then block should be rendered in the UI, which is managed by using view child, view child. View child is expecting selector. Selector means any block name, which block you want. Suppose I will give as this is first block. Okay, first block, that is the selector. And we have to define the properties. In the properties, we have to say static here. We defined static property is true. That means when to render this block, when change detected, so before change detected or after change detected, this is the situation. Actually, we have two options. That means we have static can be set to true. True indicates that. So it resolves the query before change detected. And false indicates that after change detected. And usually the decision should be before the detected or after detected, depending on situation. Currently, if I set true, that means before the change detection. So before the change detection, it will identify and render this first block. So I am defining like. So change detection, once you learn, then you will understand what is change detection. In component cycle, I will tell you. Then we can implement false also. Currently, before the change detection, because we haven't learned any events and all, so before the change detection, it will verify whether to render this block or not. Verify the render. So static should be true. And this view child should be rendering. So it should be rendering the first block. So usually this is a very complex syntactical difference actually. See, generally how do we write is, see, so then block indicates that which template to render. Actually, you will have two blocks. I have a first block. Okay, this first block, it is of type template reference. And template reference of any type and null. Any type or null. By default it is null. This is first block. And we have second block. So second block, we have two blocks. I will tell you two blocks. This is also template. So any type or null. That means we created three blocks here. So we created two blocks here. So one is first block, another one is second block. First block and second block. Now, very important is depending on the situation, this then block should render the first block or second block, whatever you want. That means multiple blocks are defined. It can render the first block or it can render the second block. That means these two blocks should be rendered into the UI. Who is responsible for rendering these blocks into the UI? Actually, that is done by using view child. That means a view child will come to picture. this view child, so we'll use the selector. So first block, this selector is used in UI. So in the UI, it will generate a first block, and this first block will be defined as static as true. That means before the change detection, it will render this block. So that means the first block is rendered by view child. So the first block is rendered by view child if the selector is asking for first block. Similarly, the second block will be rendered by view child if the selector is asking for the second block. Then we have to write view child, so second block. So, and this is how, and this also static is equal to true. That means before the change detection, it should happen. That means you defined two blocks. That's good. These two blocks currently don't have anything because here you are just defining the blocks. They don't have anything. You are just configuring the blocks. And important, now what we want to do is, technically what we want to do is, so generally whenever the request happens for first block, view child should render the first block, and second block, view child should render the second block. That means this then block is handling two blocks extra, which you will render according to the situation. How we can configure that, how we can define and handle that. That means whenever the page starts, whenever the application starts, so we need to render that content and display. Usually here, so the then block, observe carefully, this then block need to be applied with the first block or second block. That means then block will decide which one to be rendering, first block or second block, which one you want to render. That means we can simply put a constructor here. Initially, I am keeping a constructor here. In the constructor, suppose I am configuring, this dot then block is equal to, so this dot first block. That means now then block is applied with first block. Then it will render the first block. If then block is applied with second block, it will render the second block. You can define hundreds of blocks, and you can tell which block to execute, which block to render by using dynamically. That means now then block is using first block. Then block can use second block, third block. You can design any number of blocks. All the blocks that you design, they must be of type template reference. And then block will decide which one to render by using view child. It will pick up and it will render. Currently we defined first block. Okay, I written in the constructor actually, but change detection is usually happens on a special event called on init. I will show you that. Initially I written in a constructor that then block will be first block. Okay, let's go to the UI now. In the UI, we are writing the condition simply like this. So we have a div, and here under that we have two templates, ng template. This template is having an ID hash. This is having first block. This is first block. Okay, there is another template, ng template, and this is having the ID second block. That means we have two blocks, second block, first block and second block. Two blocks are there. So we have two blocks. So this is then block. So, and this is another then block. This is another then block. That means two types are defined. First, syntactically I am giving you. Then we will put in example. So we have one then block, another then block, two then blocks are there here. Two then blocks are there, and one else block will be there. ng template, so and one else block will be there. So that means hash else block. So one else block will be there. Here I will define as else block. This is else block. Now observe carefully. Generally when we write the condition, we write ng if condition. So condition is coming from is visible. It is coming from is visible is true. Then what we are writing? Then we are writing then block. Observe carefully. This then block can render the first block or it can render the second block. It can render the first block or second block. Currently, then block is having a template reference. Then block is assigned with first block. That means currently it will use the first block. It will select the first block. If then block is defined as second block, then it will render the second block. So if it is not, then else we have to define else block. We have to configure the else block. Currently, that means actually in the syntax, you can write only one then and only one else. But with the help of viewchild, we design external then block. Two external then blocks we designed, and we are rendering any one out of them depending on the situation. That means one then block, so another then block. But actually in the previous you saw that then block can be only one. But observe here, so then block is the first block. So here you can see currently there is no output. Why there is no output? Because observe here in the output what you can see is in the console. When I run this in the console, you can see there is no error. That means technically it is okay, no problem. But in the body section, observe here in the div here, there is no content rendered here. Three containers are there. There is no content render here. Why there are no contents rendered here? So that means why there are no contents rendered here? Because this rendering of content, suppose I said false. So that means I defined here is visible is false. Is visible is false. Is visible is false means it will render. So first block is right. Is visible is block. So else block is working fine. This block spelling is wrong. Okay. Else block is running fine. Okay. So else block is running fine. So that means it is accessing that else block and displaying. That means else block is working fine. Now here I am defining is true. So I am defining is true. Then if is visible is true, so then block, it has to render the then block. But in then block there are two blocks, first block or second block. So currently in the constructor, then block is defined as first block, and you can see that it is not displaying that. Why it is not displaying? Else is displaying, no problem, else is displaying, but it is not displaying this because constructor is the function which executes immediately when the class is created. And at that time, so all the values are set to null. And viewchild can render the information on change detection only. Change detection usually happens only on initialization. That means our component have several phases. Which you will learn in the next level. In the next level, you will learn about component cycle. Our component has several phases. In the phases, so we have a phase called initialization. And usually change detection means initializing the values, assigning the values, assigning the content is done on initialization. Assigning the content is done on initialization. And you are writing inside the constructor. That means actually viewchild usually able to render the content on change detection And on change detection actually happens on init. That means it happens on initialization. It is a phase of component cycle. We will discuss component cycle detail. That means now actually our component have to use, so a change detection. That means our component have to use this template not required here. Our component have to use an event called on init. Our component have to use on init. And this class should implement, this short class should implement on init. It should implement on init. If it is implementing on init, so on init have a function. It is an interface. Interface have a function. That function must be implemented. And on init, so why it is showing error? Because it simply says that this requires a function called ng on init that need to be implemented. So that need to be implemented. That means now here, instead of constructor, we are giving this work to ng on init method, because it is an interface method. It is an interface method. If it is an interface method, it is mandatory and not an optional one. If it is an interface method and not an optional one, it is mandatory to implement. It is mandatory to implement. You have to implement. That means on init. So then apply this first block as the then block. Then it will apply that first block as then block. Then only it will work. That is the reason actually this type of concept is not discussed in ng if immediately anybody. Usually majority of the people discuss this topic in a concept called component cycle. They discuss under component cycle. Because without understanding the concept called change detection, they cannot easily understand this approach. Anyhow, when I explain you the component cycle, I will show you one more time. So example we will see, but you should know that. So in the component cycle, component have a cycle, which you will learn in the next levels. I will detailedly explain. It's a very big concept. So view child can be handled only on change detection. What is change detection? Forget about that currently. So as of now, you should know that change detection is nothing but initializing the view. As of now, right? It is initializing the values. Initializing the views, so is done on change detection. So that is the reason. So initializing the values and initializing of view is done on change detection. Without change detection happened, so your application cannot render the content that is defined through then blocks. So how you can define external? Suppose this then block is second block. Then block is second block. Then you can see that it is going to render another then block. That means you have 2 then blocks. You can write any number of then blocks. But remember, all these then blocks need a selector. These then blocks need a selector. And these then blocks are rendered by using view child. And every then block must be of type template reference. So we have to create a then block as template reference. You can create any number of then blocks as a template reference and you can render them. But multiple then statements cannot be written in the query. ngIf will not allow multiple then. ngIf will not allow multiple then. It will allow only one then. That means it will allow only one then and one else. Then how to handle multiple conditions? Your then block should be able to query multiple by using template reference and view child. You have to create external then blocks and you have to use them for rendering. This is actually how we configure the multiple conditions. And this is very important because almost in every experienced Angular interview, you will find this question: change detection and view child and template reference. These three terms are regularly used. And how you can generate a then block explicit and render the then block. Can we handle multiple conditions? So you need to be aware of that. So how you configure the then block? By using template reference. How you render the then block? By using view child. View child is used to render the then block. Render the then block. Configuring the then block is done by using template reference. And very important here is when this is rendered, when this external then block can be handled, when view child can work. View child can work only on option, and change detection happens on initialization. So you have to implement init, and through that you can access and you can use it. So can you directly define multiple then blocks? No. Can you directly define multiple conditions? No. You can define multiple then blocks and render. Or there is another option. You can do in another way. If there are several conditions to handle, then what you can do, you can use a switch also. Of course, you know that if there are many conditions to handle, then we don't prefer using this if and then multiple blocks. We simply use a switch directive. Switch directive can handle multiple conditions, can select only what is required for that situation. So that we will see how we can handle the switch. So instead of this, right? So this is very important concept. You need to know how to handle the view childs, external then blocks. We will implement in examples when we are learning a component cycle change detection. We will discuss this one more time. But as of now, situation wise, according to if and then, so how to handle this, you need to know. That already I showed you. But if there are multiple conditions, then we generally use ng switch. We use ng switch. You know that if there are many conditions, we better use ng switch. Switch can select only what is required and directly execute that and render it into the UI. How this ng switch is used to render the contents, that we will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will continue with this. So once try this. If you feel any confusion in this, I will explain this one more time tomorrow. So how to handle this view child, right? So, but don't worry about change detection, component cycle, those you will learn later. As of now, just ignore them. Just understand that we need these rules for rendering the view child, right? We are going to discuss that again in component cycle. But one more time, I will explain. If you feel any confusion in the next session, we will see that, right? Once you try this in the next session, I will tell you, right? One more time. And we can go with ng switch and other options, how to handle these directives. Huh? Tomorrow we'll continue with this.